nobody knows what they're doing. From the outside, when you come into tech, you think everybody knows what the fuck they're doing, and that, they've learned this from many years of experience. But the reality is, like, under the hood, behind the sheet, it really, nobody knows what they're doing. And so that is a huge thing to understand. Like, that's something that I used to worry about and have a lot of anxiety about. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I need to read this, I need to figure this out. And there's certainly a healthy piece of anxiety. But at the end of the day, like, every founder is just figuring it out. Even in tech, they're just figuring it out, like, regardless if they've gone to school for it or not. And that was something huge for me to understand.
Do good work is not a label, but a way of living. It is the constant and diligent effort to achieve a new level of excellence in one's own life. It is the hidden inner beauty behind the struggle to achieve excellence. It's not perfect, but imperfect. It is the effort, discipline, and focus that often goes unnoticed. The goal of Do Good Work is to highlight that drive. The guests I have on this show emulate this drive in their own special way. You'll be able to apply new ideas into your own life by learning from them. We will also have one-on-one episodes with me, where we'll dive into my own experience with entrepreneurship and leadership. Every episode is designed to provide you with ideas that you can apply and grow in excellence in all areas of your life, business, and career.
Today on Do Good Work, we have Zeb Evans. Zeb is the co-founder and CEO of ClickUp, the leading all-in-one workplace productivity platform servicing more than 2.5 million users around the world. As a serial entrepreneur, Zeb has started several software companies with over 100 million in revenue, with a focus on building tools that increase productivity and save people time. Zeb is on a mission to make the world more productive. Well, Zeb, thank you so much for being on, man.
Thank you so much for having me, Roll.
Dude, I've been looking forward to this conversation because, like, a buddy of mine told me about ClickUp, I think back in either late 2017 or early 2018. And he's like, hey, you got to check this out. It's the next big thing. And I'm like, you're crazy. I went and checked it out. And then I started using it for a couple of projects. And then I saw you guys now like in 2020, 2021, and our trolley here in downtown San Diego. I'm like, these guys blew up. But it's exciting to see ClickUp. And Zeb, and I know you probably pitched this or talked about it for your 10-second pitch, but can you explain to our listeners, what is ClickUp?
Absolutely. Yeah, so ClickUp is a platform to put all of your work in one place. So when you think about the productivity ecosystem right now, you have several different categories of work. Usually you're using something for project management, something for note-taking, something possibly for time tracking, OKR, workload, maybe a few different apps for something that's comparable to like an Airtable or a spreadsheet, Google Sheets. So ClickUp is just one platform to replace all of those pieces of your work. The goal is saving you time. Right. So traditionally, when you're using, 5 to 10 different separate applications, you don't know where your work is. You don't know what other people are working on. And you certainly don't know what to do next. There's no priority to what you should do. And so those are the few main problems that we aim to solve by giving you this very, very customizable platform that works the way that you work. So that's the second piece of this, is that we've tried to remove the opinion from the way that you work. Other software seems to be very opinionated and saying you have to use it for this specific use case. Something like Jira, you got to use it for engineering. Asana usually has to be used for something simple. And so there really wasn't anything that you could just replace Jira, but also replace something like Asana. And that's really what ClickUp's foundation was.
And I appreciate that, because you're able to kind of make a almost like Play-Doh, like a mold where the user can then make it to whatever they need in their use case. And man, like, I've used this for small projects. Actually, one of the guys I had on the podcast, he managed billion-dollar projects, and I introduced him to ClickUp. He's like, wow, I kind of love this. It's probably going to replace what I've been using. But I'm curious, because it's almost counterintuitive, especially in the entrepreneur space. It's like niche down. The riches are in the niches, or there's a lot of cash stuffed in the pigeonholes. Like, why be the one app to rule them all?
Look, it's a great question, and it is something that we struggled with early on. I always had this vision for just being that everything for everyone for work, just because of my own frustrations. So we relentlessly focused on that. But I can't tell you how many times we heard, you have to choose a niche, you've got to choose a vertical. It's impossible to do this. And I think to some extent there is truth to that. But what I would say, what I encourage everybody that's building a product is to build the product thinking about more than one niche. Doesn't have to be everyone for everything, but at least several different niches or verticals. And as long as you build the product that way, that works for a few of those verticals, then you can market it for whatever you want it to be. Where you can be reactive in marketing, you can be reactive in sales. So there is definitely truth to, when you start off with targeting a specific niche or vertical, it's much easier to gain market share, to gain product market fit for sure. And to really listen to your customers for their use cases. So that's what I'm a huge advocate for is still doing that, but at the same time, in the back of your mind, knowing that your product can work for multiple niches or multiple verticals. And then in that way, if you make a mistake in the niche that you're choosing, maybe that market just doesn't really need that software. Then you can really quickly pivot without changing your whole product. All you have to do is change your marketing and your sales tactics.
That's really smart too, because then the messaging can always be refined and fine tuned, and brands rebrand all the time. But I think is this more like a trend in SaaS where we're becoming more like grouping of different apps, or is this a trend that you're seeing in other verticals or spaces as well?
I think that there is in general this bundling that is certainly happening again. I wouldn't say that it's bundling of several products combined into one product. It's more so that high level bundling that you see in large companies like Microsoft, acquisitions and competitive products that are creating. Salesforce, you're starting to see that. So I think we had this unbundling occur. There's kind of 4 different versions of Office suites that we call them, like Office Suite 1.0, which was your traditional Microsoft Word, everything. Office Suite 2.0 that just moved everything to the cloud, like Google Docs, Google Sheets. 3.0 just added integrations to that. And now 4.0 is where we are. And so we see us, in this category as somewhat of a lone wolf that can replace all of those things in one platform. But we have a lot of competition from bigger industry players like Microsoft, Google's of the world that can replace them with separate products, just bundled under one roof.
It's interesting. And I really appreciated that even though like you were discouraged, it sounds like it might've been discouraging to hear it's impossible. You're doing what others say is impossible. So I think that's a really good silver lining for anyone out there, is to continue to persist. And we'll talk about that in a bit, but I'm curious, like why focus on productivity?
I will say, so it kind of starts with my story a little bit. And my first tech company, and by the way, I didn't actually study tech. I was from North Carolina, so they didn't have, that wasn't really an option there. But I had always just been very drawn to tech, like from an early age. And I was that kid that, had websites. I didn't actually code them, but I knew HTML basics. And then in college, I wasn't being stimulated really. And so I learned to code on the side in college. And when I did, I started my first tech company and dropped out of college. And that was where I started like my dance with productivity software, because when it was just myself, I used Basecamp. And then when I started hiring other engineers, they were like, hey, you need Jira. So we started adding Jira, and then we would hire marketing people and they'd be like, hey, you need Asana. And then you'd have people that were opinionated about having boards. So we had Trello. Then we needed chat, but not everybody wanted to use Slack. So we had Skype and Slack at the time. We still had Google Sheets. We had Google Docs. We had Evernote. And then I needed something for my personal reminders. So I used Todoist, something simple that would tell me like, remind me about this. So we ended up with 15 different productivity applications. And at the end of the day, I'm just like sitting there wondering, what is everybody working on? Like, I've got to go check different applications. I've got to figure out how to prioritize work. And I certainly don't know what I should be working on right now. And so that was where like all of my frustrations arose, in that it felt like all of these products that were supposed to save you time were actually wasting time.
That's really interesting. And that you found yourself almost, and I see right now in the product suite of ClickUp, almost like a replacement for every single one of those. And I mean, the next frontier is like obviously the communication workflows, but I'm really curious, like, have you always been like drawn into productivity? Like I recently learned that you sleep around 5 hours a night. Like I can't function less than 6 hours a night. Maybe that's my limiting belief, but I'm curious, were you always drawn to like optimize your day to be more productive, or was it more like a practical use case? Like, hey, our team needs to keep moving. We're wasting too much here, even with costs and time. Like what was the balance that you found?
I think that urgency of time starts with, I've had several near-death experiences, and each time it becomes this like shocker of life that's like, hey, life is short. Like you really are here and then you're gone. And so you got to spend every minute very wisely. And I think that's where like my starting of productivity started, like really of this focus on efficiency, this focus on like making use of every moment as visibly as possible. And so that's certainly, I think, where that stuff came from. And it was just happened to be married with like productivity software. I mean, at the time, I think that we were at this, 3 years ago, doesn't seem that long ago. But it really was, when it comes to productivity, we were in a very different world then. You didn't really have any no-code solutions. You certainly didn't have any good docs solutions. And honestly, that even the project management back then was pretty subpar. There was no real automations or integrations or anything that helped your workflow a lot. So I think it was a combination certainly of like my focus and on the urgency of time and efficiency, combined with using software that I felt was doing the opposite.
That's interesting. Is that embedded in your team right now? Like that sense of urgency, is that part of the culture?
For sure. Yeah. It's one of our core values. Urgency and optimism is actually one together. Because, it's along with be direct, right? Because be direct, it doesn't mean be a dick. It just means it's very inefficient to like skate around issues, and not bring them up. Like the only problems that you can solve are problems you're aware of. So you have to be direct about problems you have and a problem your company has. And that goes along with like urgency, right? You've got to be urgent about it. Otherwise those problems snowball, they turn into big problems. And so certainly that is embedded in our culture and our DNA.
That's really cool. And I know like you guys, I mean, it's insane to see how fast you guys work. So I know that part of the way that you lead the team, the culture is embedded in that. But can you talk to us a little bit more about how you increase your velocity? Because I know that you've kind of went counterintuitive when it comes to development.
Yeah, like I will say that there is, and I'll relate this back to a core value too. One of our core values was progress over perfection. So what that meant in engineering terms was basically, do things as quickly as possible. It doesn't have to be perfect. And even on the product side, we don't have to do a ton of user research that takes many months. We don't have to go to design prototyping that takes another month, and then go into architecting the engineering side. Like we literally, for when we were starting out, really up until a few months ago, we would over the weekend do design and product for features and UX for features. Monday morning we would have it done. It would go into development and we would ship it Friday. And that was almost every feature. And it was just like this rat race behind doing that. Oh, and it was fun. It was a lot of fun. Like it's fun as a startup doing that. And so I actually would advocate for doing something like that as a startup. So I'm gonna give you kind of two sides to that answer, because you can't do that. You can't do that forever. But when you can is when you're a startup, and your users will forgive you for things that you do wrong. For little bugs, they're gonna forgive you for that. And you'll also learn a lot more by not overthinking development, not overthinking features. You can really just start with like something small, do that 1% improvement, 2 or 3% improvement, and then listen to feedback, see if you're going in the right direction. If you are, continue on that path. Otherwise, change your path. And you can do it really, really quickly. And so that's certainly how we were able to build a product. And there's other, like little tricks that we had that I can certainly talk about, but that's the high level strategy of how we were able to build a product so fast. But there comes a point where you do have to, where you get, large enough where you have to change your tactics a little bit. And we changed our core value to progress towards perfection instead of progress over perfection. So it's like, it's this one word difference, but it's huge, because instead of like not caring about perfection, now we do. We're on that path towards perfection. So when we're writing code, when we're writing tests for all of our code, also, we're making sure we don't have any regressions, and we're not shipping if we do. We're certainly slowing down our pace a little bit to do a little bit more user research, because we have close to 4 million users now, and if you ship something bad, you're gonna really screw up. So you can't do that anymore. But when you're starting out, you can. And I think that's like a fundamental thing to understand that people aren't really saying much in Silicon Valley and in tech.
No, I love that, because my question to follow up that was, because I remember seeing that and seeing like your emphasis in that, but it's like, how do you gauge? Is it the number of users? Is it revenue? Is it time for you to be able to identify, I'm going to start putting some guardrails just to make sure that we're moving towards perfection? What metric were you looking at?
Your users will tell you. I think if you have good enough insight into what your users are saying, like you'll know very, very quickly whether or not you need to change tactics. And so, you can never listen to one user. Obviously, you never listen to, that 1%. That 1% is usually the vocal, and you really just have to, in some ways, like discount what they're saying a little bit. Otherwise, you're going to get pulled in that 1% direction. You got to look at the majority of stuff. And there's a lot of tools to do that. We used Canny early on. It's a feedback platform. It's been like life-changing for us. And really just hearing people's feedback, hearing customers' feedback and users' feedback, and knowing what's going on. And so I read every single piece of feedback. I think if the CEO isn't the product person, whoever is the product person needs to hear every single piece of feedback. It doesn't matter if it takes 3 hours a day. Like, you need to read every single piece of feedback as you're starting out, and you're going to know very quickly when you need to change directions.
That makes a lot of sense. Getting it from the actual users, the end customer. You're in a very competitive space with, like you mentioned, really big competitors in different areas because you compete on different platforms. But what were some of the beliefs that you and your team had to perform rapid, to increase the velocity, but also, like you mentioned, maintain that optimism to be where you are right now? Because this is like, again, you're doing what others quote unquote say impossible.
Yeah. I hate going too much into core values, but honestly, at our company, core values is like the foundation of everything. It's not like that bullshit, fluffy stuff that everyone says. And so the optimism piece of our core values is very true. And that's what we screen for, actually. And so when we're hiring people, one of the 4 or 5 things that we're looking for is optimism. And we rate on a 1 to 10. It sounds ridiculous rating people for that. But what you can do is, you can find little red flags, especially when you're doing references. You ask somebody, how happy was the person? How optimistic were they? Everybody has bad days. It's not about, being 100% happy most of the time. But if you're getting, 6s or 7s on somebody that they sent you a reference for, which, by the way, you're always sending good references for, that there might be a problem there. And you especially in engineering, you don't want that bad apple. You don't want that negative person on your team. And we've had them. Don't get me wrong. We've made those mistakes. But you have to fix it really quickly. They're not going to change. A negative person, generally speaking, unless they're going through bad days, but you should be there to support them, they're going to continue being negative. So that is like the first and foremost thing I think is most important, is building a team that is optimistic themselves. And that's really like that's the majority of it. You certainly need to have a product leader that is pushing people and that is pushing the bounds of kind of what the status quo is. But the team has to be optimistic themselves for sure.
And I know that your core values aren't fluff. I've seen your lives or your videos, and you definitely like show emphasis around it. And I just want our audience to know that the core values that you set from leadership top down, like they mean something. And if you don't follow them, then they're just going to mean nothing. But I love the fact that simple focus on an optimistic, positive worldview or optimism allows you to do better, perform better, and it allows trust, I believe, within an organization and to be able to perform at our best work. Well, Zeb, I have one last question for you. I'm really curious about this one because I'm an active user. But one of the things that I do with clients is I help them like shorten the gap between information and action. When ClickUp has been probably the best tool to do that. But what's the vision? Like, what's next? Like, what are you looking for in this next decade?
I think there's one big missing piece, and you alluded to it at the beginning, is communication. I think that is the real elephant in the room as far as the other app that people still have to use for work. So we're working on that right now, and I'm super excited about it. It's something I've been working on for many months, and trying to really take the best of what exists, but also put our ClickUp spin on it, just to make it a better user experience, but also to make things like chat less distracting. Like I think that Slack is. I'm still a huge believer in both synchronous and asynchronous communication, and there is a world where you need something that is instant and bothersome, like Slack. So you can't take that away. I think that there's some tools that have tried to do that, like Twist, that have really just tried to take away that instantaneous communication for distractions. But like you still need that, and that's why Slack still exists. That's why Microsoft Teams exists. So we're not trying to take that away. But our perspective is that a lot of the work that you're doing, a lot of the communication you have isn't important, isn't as important as some other messages. So we're trying to put our spin on it to where we can kind of filter all the stuff that's important and show that to you first, and really have this instant communication that you need. and then have everything else for later to make it be a little bit less distracting. So it's certainly it's a huge challenge. It's a daunting challenge, but we're building a great team for this. Getting some people from Slack actually as well to help us build this, and I'm really, really excited about it this year.
That's amazing. What do you do for fun, by the way, with ClickUp and all this cool stuff? What do you do for fun?
It's a great question. I have the most fun when I'm working outside or working in a different place. It sounds silly, but like if I just can go travel and work like on a beach, on the side of a beach, like that is fun for me. I used to be a DJ. I had a DJ company in high school. I actually toured with a couple of rappers at one point.
Nice.
and it was a whole different experience, different world. But I still do that on the side sometimes. I just come take a break for an hour or so and just come DJ and just disconnect from everything. I love meditation too. So I'm actually a proponent in like not meditating for hours. Like I think 15-minute block. If you do 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes when you're feeling stressed, 15 minutes at night, like that's the best way to do it for me. Everybody's different, but for me, that's what works the most. So yeah, I've certainly a combination of those things.
A healthy balance. And now I know who's hosting or who's DJing at the ClickUp party. So, well, Zeb,
yeah, we'll have to invite you to the next one.
I appreciate it, man. For our listeners out there, what's the best place for people to go to thank you for this episode and learn more about ClickUp?
Yeah, you can email me directly, zeb@clickup.com. I'm always want to be very successful or accessible and successful in being that communication, keeping that communication open. We also have our feedback platform. It's feedback.clickup.com. And we're there, and I'm listening to everything that everybody's saying.
Awesome. We'll put those links in the show notes. And Zeb, thank you again, man.
Thank you, Raul.